Huddersfield, October the 2nd, 2013. So when the rough wind was blowing on this winter's night time, and this woman, she was happy and tall, but she did not have any money. She had to live by the side of the seaside, which was wide with the noisy seagulls up in the air. She was a good swimmer, and swimming towards a smooth island, all she wanted to do was find her home. And as she was swimming, she could not believe her eyes. It was as if the sky lit up with gold, glittering and gleaming, and she saw that there was a large ship. She was happy and excited. Far away from home, she was wondering who could possibly be on board of this ship. She'd been lost for so long. And it was then that she heard the tick-tock, tick-tock. Do that with me. She heard the tick-tock, tick-tock of a clock, and she looked and saw that on the front of the ship there was an old sand timer and a light that was giving a golden light to this dark winter's night, and it was a torch, a battery torch, and she could see that there was on board of the ship a woman, a bad woman, with a huge crooked smile upon her face, going, ha 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 ha. Can you do that with me? Going, ha 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 ha. I'm going to see what I can find. I've been here out on the sea. She was happy because she'd been so bad and so terrible. But this woman had by her side a sword, a chopping sword made of iron. And she looked and she thought, now I'm hungry. I'm going to find a way to get away from here. And the woman watched her. She had some food on board of a ship. She licked her lips. Do it with me. And she rubbed at her tongue. Can you do it with me? And she thought, I wish that I could have some of that food. And this terrible pirate woman took her iron sword and stuck it in the sand of the island. This woman looked terrible. This woman looked mean. She was eating food. This poor woman, so far away from home, thought, I don't want her to wind up using a sword on me. I hope that she doesn't use it. And she smiled. Show me. She crept. She crawled. Can you do that with me? She crept. She crawled. She picked up the iron sword, and it was heavy. And as she picked it up, the pirate woman looked and said, what do you think you're doing? And the woman couldn't stop herself. She waved the sword and dropped it, and it smashed into 1,000 pieces. And here the pirate woman cried. Can you do that with me? My granddaddy gave me that sword, and now it's broken. This woman looked and said, you might look fierce, you might look terrible, but you're just the same as me. You get sad and happy, and why do you have to go around and be so terrible? I don't know. It was me granddaddy made me become a pirate. I just like to sit around and do nothing. That doesn't hurt anybody. Oh, the woman said, do you know how to get away from here? Could we get away from this place? The pirate woman said, yes. I'll show you how to get away from here if you'll show me how to stop being so bad. And the woman said, all right. I'll do that for you. And the two of them sailed on this beautiful ship, so large. And they sailed, can you do this with me? From the top of the world to the bottom of the world, from the side of the world and all around. And instead of doing bad things, they did good things. And when she did find her home, she would sit down and talk of a pirate woman, once so bad but now so good, who cried, can you make a tear come down the side of your cheek? Who cried when she broke her sword. Year 2 story. Here we go, starting with what? Talking about the apples with her sister, this girl, this generous girl, was standing by the side of their father's orchard. The land was dry, and on the spring sunrise, the warm air was starting to blow. This girl could feel a long straight hair moving, and she thought to herself, we live here in Italy by the side of the smooth sea. We should be able to grow apples in this place. The two of them had been scratching at their chins and rubbing at their heads, trying to think of some way to make it so that the land would not be so dry. The apples needed water, and you could see these trees were starting to struggle. Sitting down and eating, they looked and they thought. By the light of the lantern, this girl could see something. She could see something, a wall. She scratched at her chin. She rubbed at her head. Can you do that with me? She scratched at her chin. She rubbed at her head. It was an old wall, a broken wall. And still with a taste of mustard and beans upon her lips, teeth and tongue, she walked towards it. She could see something scratched on the wall. It was some kind of writing. She wondered what it could possibly be. She stood there. Now, this was a girl who was not only tall, rich and generous, but she had the sweetest voice that you have ever heard in all of your life. But the song that she sang was not a sweet song. It was dark, it was deep, and it was filled with worry. As she stood there, she tapped against her leg, trying to beat out a rhythm. She thought, and she listened. She could hear something echoing in this dry place. She looked. By the side of the wall, she could see that there were insects. She could see their eggs. It was almost as if these small eggs, no bigger than a grain of sand, had legs upon them. And she knew that these insects needed water. She tried not to, but she reached towards where the eggs were moving, and she moved some of the ground to one side, and the ground fell away. She looked. She could smell damp. She could see that there was a small pond beside this wall. Where there was a pond, she could hear the noise of frogs. If there was water for frog spawn, there would be water for trees. She started to change her song. Oh, it was no longer sad. She heard it echo and rattle by this underground stream that they did not know was even there. The two of them, show me how they smiled. They smiled. They knew that these two girls could help to get the water to the trees, and the trees would grow, and they could stay in that place and still have money in their pocket to make sure that those who had so little would be able to share in the discovery of the water. Scunthorpe Foundation Stage, first story. Here we go. There was a cow that always made a big, huge mooing sound. What noise did it make? Moo! But this cow was really small, and all of the while it wanted to make milk for the pan for people to drink and to eat. But down by the side of the small sandy seaside, it was making a noise, a huge noise. It was going... Because this small cow was lost. And on this windy summer's night, as it was eating the grass, it found a dolly. A dolly in amongst the grass. Moo! I can't eat this. I wonder where it comes from. Just then, in amongst the grass, there was a yellow and black cat. "Rrrr," said the cat. "Rrrr, I think I've seen that before. It belongs to the old woman." "Old woman?" said the cow. "I'd better take it to her." Putting it on the top of its horns, this small cow walked towards the farm. The woman looked out. "Who's that knocking on the door? I'm trying to make gingerbread men." And she looked and saw the cow at the door and looked and said, "That's that doll that I lost when I was very little. Oh, I was so hoping that I would have some children and I'd be able to let them play with this doll. Oh, you are a good cow." Moo! What did the cow say? Moo! "You could give me a gingerbread man to eat. I'm tired of eating grass." The old woman didn't wait for a second. She took some gingerbread men and put them down in front of the cow. And the cow, instead of eating grass, can you do this with me, went, I like eating Gingerbread men. Here we go. Stoke ones and twos. This boy was tall and mean, and now he was by the side of the seaside where the water was calm and smooth. He was eating a hot dog that he'd found, but he was lost, far away from his home on this dry autumn morning. As he looked amongst all of the sand, he could see something that looked like a snake. He was frightened. He didn't know what it could be. He thought it could be an anaconda. But when he got closer to it, he saw that it was a toy that had been lost down by the side of the sea. His trousers, he needed a belt, and so he tied it around his waist and wore it like a belt, and he thought he looked very good. Everybody straighten your backs. He thought he looked very good. And as he was walking down by the side of the sea, he could see that there now were some clouds in the sky, and the rain was falling, and there was a rainbow in the sky, and a little boy who was crying more than the rain was falling. Can you make the rain fall with me? More than the rain was falling. This mean boy walked over and said, "What's the matter with you?" Can you say that with me? What's the matter with you? The little boy looked and said, "I was playing here with one of my favourite toys, and And when he looked at the mean boy, he could see that he had his toy snake, and he was using it like a belt. The little boy couldn't stop himself. He started to giggle. Can you do it? Look at you! Oh, thank you so much! You found my toy that I've lost, and you're using it like a belt! This mean boy tried not to, but he thought, I suppose I do look a bit funny. "Why are you here?" said the little boy. "I'm lost, but I don't mind. If you're lost, then you need to be found again. You should come back to my house. You can't miss it. It's white and wide, a beautiful house, and it's got a green doorbell. And I'm sure my mother and father will make sure that you will be found again." The two of them walked beside each other. The mean boy, can you raise your shoulders up like this? The mean boy could feel his shoulders sinking down, and he did feel funny with a snake for a belt. Can you show him that smile like this? The little boy's mother and father made sure that he got to his own home. But this little boy and the mean boy became the best of friends. And when they changed from boys, can you do that with me? When they changed from boys into men, they were the best of friends and would always laugh about the time that he had a toy snake for a belt. Stoke, year 3 and 4, starting with, did you say where? Yeah, okay, here we go. Here inside of this air raid shelter, it was dark and the sun was nowhere to be seen. If she could have done, she would have gone to her own shelter at the back of her own house. To try and make it seem less scary, she'd drawn a picture of a country scene with the sun shining high in the sky. But here, this woman, a good woman, who usually had a strong heart, she was frightened and worried about her children. Sitting in the darkness with a damp smell all about her, she was drawing in a book. She was lost. She'd gone to the middle of the city, and here on this cold, windy autumn night in 1941, she was trapped inside of the shelter, far away from her family and her home. Her heart was as cold as ice. To try and cheer herself up, she reached inside of her coat and looked at a photograph of her family. There was her husband who was fighting so far away on the other side of the world. But it was the children that she looked at the most. She looked at it. There was a smell in the air, but it did not remind her of the earth as someone was digging. It was a smell of soup, meat and vegetables. She'd never had meat in such a long time, and such big chunks of it. For a moment, She thought about how lucky she was to have this soup from the restaurant. The chef was sitting there, still with his white hat upon his head, and he said, well, there's no point in making it go to waste. You might as well have it yourself. Everyone started to cheer up, but they could hear the bombs landing outside, and all of the while she worried about her children, wondering where they were. She'd only taken the afternoon to go and visit some friends to see that they were all right. I've told you she had a good, strong heart. Years later, the children found her book. They said, what's this? They looked at a drawing that she'd made, thought and wondered why she'd drawn a picture of a bowl of soup. She'd drawn many good things, countryside scenes, cows, sheep, grass. And she told them the story of how she was so worried about them. And with every mouthful she felt slightly guilty. But it was why, when the war had finished and rationing had come to an end, she would always make for all of her children round, hearty bowls of meat and vegetable soup, for the soup that they never shared in the shelter. Who last time, didn't we? Wait, okay. Let's choose somebody else. Boy at the back. Do you want to use who or what or why? What? Eating greedily at some warm grilled pork, this boy looked about him. He had never done a day's work in all of his life. Never been outside in the fresh, clean air. Not that you could tell now. For his uncle's mansion was now getting blacker with all of the smoke that was in the air. His uncle had inherited a factory, and he did not care about how much smoke he threw into the air or how many people died inside of his factories. But here, this boy, 5 years old, thought that everything belonged to him. He was rich and short, but worst of all, he was mean. He'd never had to share anything in all of his life. And now, sent to his uncle's mansion made of glass, he did not worry about how scary it looked. All he thought of were the number of rooms and the amount of windows and how spectacularly rich his uncle was. He'd been sent away by his parents, for he'd been spiteful to his brothers and sisters. And now, on this cold winter's day, he looked across at the fireplace, and there was a new invention. A photograph in a frame, with him standing there, his back straight, looking as if all he could do is wait for this mansion to become his. And there it was. As a woman came in, an old woman, she looked about 70 years old, but really she was much younger. She had led a terrible life. She'd had to work in his uncle's factory, and it made her old before her time. And she was jealous of this young boy, the fact that he never did anything. And now she started to make the fire bigger by blowing at the bellows. And as her uncle returned, as his uncle walked into the room, he bellowed a great bass shout. "What do you think you're doing coming in here when the young master's in the room? You can do that another time." His voice echoed inside of that great mansion. Oh, he did not care. There was no happiness. There was no compassion inside of his heart. All he waited for was money. The boy sat. The boy ate. But the smoke from the fire caught at his delicate chest. For this was a time when people could catch a disease almost by looking. For there were no antibiotics. There were no medicines that they could take. And that cough became worse. And I'll tell you something. As he grew worse and worse, he was taken into a hospital. He was taken inside of the hospital, and he couldn't believe his eyes. There in a bed not far from him was the son of the jealous maid. She'd made him some stew, some fine stew with the finest of vegetables that she'd grown in the small patch outside of her house. And this boy looked, this rich boy, thinking, I will give you a whole florin just for that bowl of soup. The maid looked. All these two might well have been ill. They might have had the same disease. But she remembered when she'd been in that place, when his uncle had screamed and yelled. Well, young master, and you would wish to share when you have never shared anything in all of your life. And here she raised the spoon and she smelt those vegetables warm and remembered that grilled pork that he would not share with her. She raised it towards him and said, well, in that case, for all of the things and all of the things that you did and said, you can sit there and be hungry. Her son recovered. Her son, because he had compassion inside of his heart. But this 5-year-old boy became smaller and more wizened. And it wasn't that he died of a disease. It was as if he died of just being spiteful and mean. Year 3-4 story. This girl had always come down to the side of the sea to catch fish. She didn't always eat what it was that she caught. She was cruel, she was mean. And some would say that she was not pretty. But this girl was tall and lived by the side of the seaside that had soft shell sand. She would make sure, especially in the summer, as she looked at all of the children who would make things by the side of the sea, she would kick them over. She would kick over the sand castles and it would make a smile upon her lips. But there was no one here on this day. On this wet, cold, rainy summer's midnight, she was there, thinking to herself, what mischief can I get up to? By the side of the sea, there were lots of rock pools, and she would smash everything in them. As she looked, she saw there was a pretty seashell, and as she picked it up to break it underneath her feet, she saw an eye, a round green eye. And it seemed, at this dark time, in the middle of summer, at the height of midnight, she had never seen anything like it before. She picked up a bucket to try and find this fish that was living in this rock pool. She had never seen anything like it before. And she did not wonder about what it would taste like if she caught it. All she could think about was killing it. She started to tell everybody about it. And she said that there is one there, and no one person believed her. Oh, yes, of course, in a rock pool by the side of the sea, there is a beautiful yellow fish that has a round green eye. Of course there is. She said, it's true. It's really true. She looked, and she could see that the rock pool every day was starting to dry out in the sun. She used the bucket to bring more salty water to make sure that the fish would live so that other people could see it. When the rain came down, she knew that it was getting so that it wasn't salty enough for this fish. She had to keep checking the water in the rock pool. She started to feel as if this fish was in danger. It was almost like there was a rocket going off inside of her head. And she thought to herself, what can I do? I need to show this fish. And the weeks turned into months, and the months turned into years. And she kept on checking to make sure that the fish could be there. And one day she dipped her bucket inside of that pool and she pulled the beautiful yellow fish with a round green eye. And she thought to herself, I cannot kill this. I've spent so much time at this rock pool making sure that it wasn't too salty or not salty enough, that for a moment in her heart she thought, I've cared for this fish. I've looked after this fish. I cannot just kill it like that. She'd learned so much in trying to keep it alive that she could not bring herself to destroy it. She didn't tell anyone about it. She loved to go to that place, her special place. And on wet, cold, rainy summer's midnights, she'd sit there and look and smile and watch the fish come up the top of the water, its scales beautiful and golden, and its eyes round and green. Second Gingerbread Man story reimagining. There was a horse that was black, but but it was a very old horse. Here by the seaside, where the sea was dark, it was running happily. It had just been put into a new field. But on an afternoon in spring, all I could hear was noise. The noise of people having a picnic with strawberries, and everyone was running after the gingerbread man. The horse was very curious. The horse started to run as well. And when I could see that everyone was trying to catch the gingerbread man, the horse didn't wait for a second. It picked up the gingerbread man in its teeth, because it could run so fast, threw him up in the air. Can you make him go up in the air? And he landed on top of the train and he escaped. And as the gingerbread man was on the top of the train, he went, "Run, run and run again. You'll never catch me. I'm up on a train." And there's a story that we made up ourselves. Year 5, Year 6, Victorian story, starting with where. Here in this busy town with a fast-flowing river, this lady was sitting down. Well, not a lady. She was a poor woman, but she had the best clothes she could possibly have, and she kept her hair long, straight, brown and clean, so that people would not think of her like a beggar. She was a poor woman, but she was as kind as she could possibly be. She would share her time. She would share the time that she had with anyone. And she'd travelled to this place, walked all of the way to the steel town, but she'd become lost, and sitting hunched with the dirty shawl about her shoulders, she was trying to keep the frost from her shoulders. Her children had made the shawl for her, but they were far away, and now she was trying to earn money so that they could be released from the workhouse. The Queen had been some 60 years on the throne, but it hadn't done her any good. She was sitting here, hoping for work on a dark, cold winter's night. As she looked at the water, she saw something strange floating in the water. It was bright, it was shining, it was a box, a metal box, floating in the water with a bow on the top of it. She looked at it. What can that be? Someone has lost this. A present. It could be a present. Maybe there's a reward. And without even thinking for a second, she bent down to the side of the water and picked it out with nothing inside of her mind other than to give it back. But there was a rustling in the leaves behind her. She could just hear it above the clank and the rattle of the machines. And there stood a peeler, a policeman. "So, you think you can take anything you want? Coming to this place thinking you can have money, a woman like you, with nothing but a dirty shawl upon your back." She tried to speak, but a policeman would not listen to a woman. No one. He took her. As she sat there inside of the prison, thinking that the moon above her was shining down on her poor children so far away, she whispered to her dead husband. He'd been killed in the Boer War some 2 years before. A grenade, they said. But how could she find out? No one would ever write to her, and even if she could, she wouldn't be able to read it. She spoke to her long-dead husband. "My husband, we started with so much hope, and now you find me here on a dark, cold winter's night, inside of a prison, and our children so far away." Year 1 and 2 story, Aliens. On the sparkly night, the girl alien was there. She ran her fingers through her spiky golden hair and stamped her long feet. She was a bad alien. She could burn people if she touched them, and she could melt them if she wanted to. But here on this hot planet, where there were lots of aliens, the snow was falling down. But it wasn't made out of ice and snow. It was made out of liquid gold. She travelled far to come to this place on a moon buggy that was white and made out of sand. As she was driving along, she looked and saw something. She scratched at one of her 7 chins. She rubbed at one of her 3 heads and looked and thought, "I wonder what it could be." And then she saw it. It was like a hippopotamus. It was covered all over with fur, a huge wide smile and big round eyes. This girl looked. She was frightened. Ah! It's the most horrible thing I've ever seen in my life. It is so ugly. What she didn't know was the hippopotamus was the sweetest, kindest alien in all of the world. She wanted to go towards it. She thought, anything that ugly, I should melt it straight away. But as she got closer, this creature, covered all over with fur, ran away. As she was running, she saw something up in the sky. She could see a round, fluffy, green moon. And it was then when she came to the side of a cave, and I was looking at her. The girl alien shook and shivered. Can you shake and shiver with me? Shook and shivered, quaked and quivered. She wondered what it could be. And as she turned the corner, can you make one eye like this? The eye looked at her. The eye was inside of a house that was shiny and cold on this hot planet and was really a rocket. She looked at the hippopotamus. The hippopotamus was crying. Can you do that with me? My rocket is so cold, I can never get away from this horrible place. I wish there was someone who had so much heat inside of them that they could make my rocket rise up in the air. The girl alien looked. She blinked her 14 eyes. Can you blink your eyes? She blinked her eyes and said, well, if it's anything to do with getting rid of you, then I'll help you. I can burn things with my fingers. I can melt things. And if it gets rid of you, you ugly creature. Can you do that with me? Are you ready? Here we go. 1, 2, 3. You ugly creature. Then I'll do it as quick as I can. The girl alien. Can you get your fingers like this? Wrapped her fingers about the side of the rocket, and the rocket started to shake and shiver. Do it with me. Just as she shaked and shivered, and it started to rise up in the air. She yelled, stop! What did she yell? Stop! But it was too late. The rocket was going up and up. Can you make it go up in the sky? Now, what we're going to do is we're going to count down from 5, and then it's going to take off. You ready? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And up into the air it went with the girl still hanging on. She could see the planet, the hot planet behind her. She thought, what am I going to do? And when it landed on the round green moon, all of that creature's friends and families all came round, and they all looked and said, that thing, that alien with its spiky golden hair and its long feet, we've never seen anything quite like that. It's not the best looking thing, but if it helped you to get back, then we would like to say thank you. And on our planet, can you do it with me? Everyone is so cold. The girl alien, nobody had ever really liked her because she was so hot. She said, well, let me try and do something for you. And here she rubbed her hands together. Can you rub your hands together? And as she rubbed her hands together, it made so much heat that that cold moon soon became so beautifully warm that everyone would go up to her and say, oh, thank you. They do that with me. Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. You've made our moon so beautifully warm. And in the distance you could hear music, and everyone would smile. Can you do this with me? And she was never bad again. She would never try and burn anyone. She would just rub her hands together. Can you do it with me? And the heat would come, and they would all smile and whisper, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yep, turn around.
That's it. Do you want me to start with who, where, what, or when? Who, where, what, or when? And here we go. On a cold, windy winter's day in Cardiff, she was standing there, ready and thinking that she was going to have to travel all of the way to Australia. When she was a girl, her mother had told her about the things that she had seen when she was a girl. Sea caves in Australia were the most fantastic of creatures that no man had ever seen. Now, she was a woman, tall, clever and strong, and she knew that if she was going to go to these sea caves, first of all, she would have to learn how to dive. Then she would have to pack her bags so that she could survive. Now, she was thinking, all of the things that I have done. I have never been to Australia. I've been to the coldest of the world in the South Pole. But now I want to go and see the things that my mother described to me when I was a child. She thought that she would find treasure, not just gold, but find things that would help everyone in this world. She knew everything that there was to know about how to survive. She had a box with her, a new box, filled with all of the things that she would need, a survival box, but a map that had once belonged to her mother. Now it was ripped and torn and scrumpled paper, but on that map it showed her exactly where she needed to go. And with all of her travelling, she knew what it was she needed to do to survive. On the map, it had a beautiful picture of a lighthouse. But as she stood here on the coast of Australia, that lighthouse was now old, unused and broken. It was as if someone had dropped a bomb upon it, but it was just age that had helped it to fall apart. And she knew that the entrance to the sea caves were by the side of this lighthouse. She lowered herself down. She had every harness, everything that she could possibly need. And as she got lower and lower, with the diving gear strapped to her back, she fitted it to her mouth and went under the water. There she saw things such as no one had ever seen. Sea urchins, fish that were as long as a man's arm, as thin as a man's finger, round golden eyes and blood-red fins. She knew to keep well clear of all of those. And it was only as she reached inside of one of the caves, she could see that it was filled with moss. Moss all about in that sea cave. And for a moment, she lost concentration and forgot. She took off one of her diving gloves and rested herself back upon a rock. Something felt soft underneath her hand, and it was then that she looked and saw an anemone. It was there, flat and broad, soft-bodied. She looked at it. She even pulled it from the rock and looked at it, and it was then that it locked itself about her fingers. She could feel its biting mouthparts penetrating into her skin, and she could feel her hand becoming numb. She did not know what to do. Inside of a survival box, she had some anti-venom for any kind of snake, but not for this creature, such as no man had ever seen or touched. She did not know what to do, but she could hear her mother's voice in her ear. If there is something that stings and bites, whatever grows in that place could be the thing that could save you. All about her, she saw this moss on the side of the wall. She pulled the anemone away from her hand and started to squeeze the sea moss into that cut, into that dip. And it stung as if someone had wrapped her fingers about a red-hot piece of metal. Her arm was locked. She knew she had to get out of this place if she was to survive. Years later, you'll see her there, down by the side of the sea. She is there, her hand now as good as it has ever been, but with the sea cave moss on the roof. When she was down there, she had looked and seen that many people had died in that place. There were bones lying down, and perhaps it was just that voice in her head from her mother. Whatever it is that grows so well in that place is the thing that can help you survive. The venom that was found inside of that sea anemone was used by doctors. It was a fine medicine such as no one had ever found. It wasn't a treasure in money, but it was a treasure that helped so many people inside of hospitals, and she would smile to think that a small bite and the use of some moss saved her life and saved so many people in all of this world.